All right, looks like we are live here in the messy magnetic memory method studio memory palace, and really I just want to pick up on a very interesting question that I get a lot, and it is the danger of reusing a memory palace. This is exactly how this question was framed: the danger of reusing a memory palace. And the question too was framed in the sense of what happens, for long-term memory. Am I going to erase long-term memory if I reuse a memory palace? And I have to say that this is not the use of the magnetic memory method at all. The magnetic memory method uses memory palaces to get information into long-term memory so that it's in long-term memory, right? The memory palace is a tool that got it there, but it doesn't rely on eternal placement in that memory palace. So often what you'll find is that the information still is in the memory palace. Memory palaces being mental constructs based on, usually or recommendedly, on real locations. And then you want to go back into your memory palace only as many times as necessary to encode it into long-term memory so that it's reliably there. And you'll find that you'll be able to go back years and years and years later and still do that. Alan says, "Hi, Anthony. Alan in Melbourne. Glad you're doing this topic. Thank you for being here, Alan. Great to see you this morning. And let me know if you're on the call where you are in the world." This is going to be a short one because I've got to go and meet a real estate person because I want to pick his brains about the memory tasks involved in real estate. But looking at this email and the question, it is really just an interesting way of framing it, because people bring so many fears and dangers, and there's no danger ever in reusing a memory palace. Here's what the opportunity is, though. The opportunity is to practice your memory and get better and better at the skill of reusing a memory palace. The skill of reusing a memory palace is something that can only be based upon the skill of using a memory palace. So if you're going to reuse a memory palace, you want to be very, very sufficient at using a memory palace in the first place. So there is no danger in reusing a memory palace, developing that skill, because it is a strengthening of a skill that you've already developed. So that's a very, very important principle, and one that I really want to drill home. And one of the problems is that people think in advance of accomplishment. Nazro says, "Hello, dear Anthony." Oh, well, hello, dear Nazro. Thanks for being here. Where are you in the world? I really find that this happens often. My inbox is filled with fear in advance of accomplishment. And that's mental activity that is stopping you from taking action to develop the first skill. So before one worries about the danger of a skill you haven't got yet, that you're not even going to get until you master the first one, then you're just getting in your own way of accomplishment. So think about it in terms of drawing, right? Would you worry about being able to draw the Eiffel Tower before you can draw a triangle, right? It's really, really important not to get worried about drawing the Eiffel Tower before you can draw a triangle. And it's the same thing with a memory palace. Why worry about being able to make a memory palace, or reuse a memory palace rather, until that you can use a memory palace in the first place, right? So once you do get into problems, though, you still won't get problems. You won't have problems, because the only problems you could ever have with reusing memory palaces are what's called ghosting, or what's called the ugly sister effect. Now, there's something on magneticmemorymethod.com called The Beginner's Guide to Overcoming the Ugly Sister Effect. And I kind of toss ghosting and the ugly sister effect into the same canister. They're not exactly the same thing, but they're so tightly related that I feel that it's well worth placing them together, lumping them together. And they are not problems. They are benefits. Why? Because if you get to the point where you can start worrying about drawing the Eiffel Tower because you know very well how to draw a triangle, then All of those little things, and I feel like maybe this is a Bob Ross moment from The Joy of Painting. They're just wonderful little opportunities to grow, right? No, and I don't mean that in a sarcastic way, but it really is that way, because you have mastered one thing, and now you develop more levels of mastery on top of that. So get one memory palace down, then practice reusing it. You can't go wrong. You can't fail. There's no danger, except unless you're not using memory palaces for the intended purpose of getting information into long-term memory so that it's part of your knowledge set, it's part of your base, right? So that you can use that information, recall it, without necessarily needing the mnemonics. Now, the mnemonics can still be there. They can last forever. You can hold memory palaces forever and ever and ever. Amen. I do this often. I've talked with Alex Mullen, current world memory champion, and he would generally just rather create a new memory palace than reuse one. And there's lots and lots of reasons for that. Some of them are practical, right? Because it's just so fast to create new memory palaces, and you do kind of feel like you want to hold on to this old memory palace. You don't want to reuse them. There's something special about them, especially when you're actually using them. But this fear in advance really gets in the way of doing anything at all. So why not just dive in and master the baseline skills? And Jack Errol says, Hi, Jack. Where are you in the world today? This is the real key message here, is there's no danger at all in reusing memory palaces. The only danger is in trying to get ahead of accomplishment, baseline accomplishment that you can develop upon. And so I really would encourage you, if you are in any way thinking ahead of the game, think ahead, but not in a way that endangers or creates this danger that you're not going to get the results from baseline skills. So Jack says, when should we reuse the same memory palace? Well, you just hopped on the call, but the whole point is you should only be worrying about that when you're very good or accomplished with just using a memory palace in the first place. So what does that mean? Let's say your memory palace has 10 rooms. Each room has 4 stations. That's 40 stations. If you can successfully go through that memory palace forwards, backwards, and hop in at the middle and go from end to end with information in it, let's say 40 pieces of vocabulary, and then you think, you know what? That's not even using it once enough. Let's go and add a phrase to each piece of vocabulary, right? And then you have really fleshed that out. You've used it, and you've used it to encode the information so that you have it in your memory palace. You go back and you think, okay, that's what that word was there, and you've got it. And then you put a phrase on it, and you're able to do that successfully for all 40 stations in the memory palace. Now you can start thinking, how can I reuse this? Now, technically, you've already reused it because you've gotten the core vocabulary, then you've added phrases to each piece of vocabulary. So you can reuse it by already reusing it based on what you've established. And then you could think, okay, so that was 40 words of vocabulary and 40 phrases. So now I will just do another 40 words and another 40 phrases. But the point is you reuse a memory palace after you've successfully used it. Now, 40 is maybe a rich number for many people. It may be too much. But an example of more than 40 was when I did the hiragana and then reused it right away for the katakana, right? And so it's just reusing it for katakana makes zero sense unless the hiragana was successfully memorized. And I don't mean memorized with needing to revisit the memory palace to recall it. It needed to be, and that's the condition of it being successfully used in the first place, is that it's in long-term memory. So it doesn't have to be, okay, what was Ezra Pound doing for Mu? You know, like it's just, you can, that's not the goal. The goal is just to know it, right? So that's really, really, really important. So in any case, that is the baseline here, and you want to be able to really not confuse activity with accomplishment. And a lot of people, they seem to get this fear thing, and they use words in their emails to me like danger. Is it dangerous? And things of this nature, just, they really concern me, because you don't have danger in memory, except for when you're going to an exam and you might fail. But this is the thing with memory techniques, is dig your wells before that you are thirsty, and be prepared. Learn these skills in advance of any danger. And even, I'll never forget Scott Gosnell. He is a translator of Bruno Giordano, or Giordano Bruno. I always sometimes get those things backwards, but it's almost like a spoonerism, which is kind of related to what we're talking about, the ugly sister effect, when the words come in the wrong order. But in any case, he talked about going into a examination room and showing up there and using it as a memory palace. If you could figure out the order or where your exam would take place, you could go there in advance of the exam and actually study in the examination room and use it as a memory palace. See, that is really, really digging your wells before that you're thirsty. Jack says, I use my memory house for playing cards. I've been able to, these questions just disappear on the screen. They should just let them stay. I use my house for a memory palace for playing cards. I have been able to reuse it for different decks, but not on the same day. Is this advisable to do? Really, that's great that you can reuse it. You should be able to reuse it just right away. So if you wanted to do multiple drills, practice being able to do multiple drills. That's how I do cards. I'll just start all over again. There was another great question here from Alexander. Alexander says, could you talk about using memory palaces to learn to write Chinese hense? We can talk about that at a different time, but I have a coffee meeting here coming up right across the street. But basically, memory techniques, very, very briefly, for learning to write characters. First, what I do is I see the character, like this morning, I was looking at the character for fan, like meal, right? And I was thinking already about it. What am I going to do to just baseline, before I worry about how I'm going to write it? What am I going to do to be able to recognize it and to see it in my mind? And I can see it in my mind a little bit right now, just after sort of first exposure, because I haven't been doing much character study, but I just, I can see a line like that, and it's because I thought, there's one of these kind of container things there, and I know that was over top of something, and then there was something else. And so the first line is to really get a sense of what that character is like in just as a visual thing, right? And you might want to make associations with the shapes mentally, and you can do that in a memory palace. Now, stroke order, right, is something that the general guiding principles can be memorized. It's almost just like memorizing a numerical sequence, right? And you develop intuition for it and go from there. So a lot of things have to do with memorizing muscle memory things. So stroke order is both mental cognition, it's the access of the guiding principles and rules, and then it's actually putting it into muscle memory through dedicated practice, which then has to be layered onto, integrated with, become a part of actual mental and memory practice mixed together, and then actually sitting down and doing writing. And again, I'm not doing writing as such yet. It's something that may come later, but I'm focused primarily on oral Chinese, and my goals, which I highly recommend that you have specific goals, and it can be as simple as being able to write 10 hense by the end of the week or the end of the month or the end of the quarter or whatever the case is. But right now, my specific goals are being able to speak the words and the phrases that my wife wants me to be able to speak with her. And I just said to her, you have free reign. Tell me what it is to learn. And so that is what we are doing. And so, the things that she wanted me to learn was to be able to say, I don't think that this is healthy, right? And because, we had an interesting discussion. I was like, no, let's not eat that. And the way that I was expressing it was maybe a little bit harsh in English or whatever. And so she said, that's something to learn how to say properly and politely in Chinese. So I am actually getting her to give me at least a couple new phrases a day and then working on those. And so my goal is just to build from there, because my goal is to be able to speak oral Chinese and to be able to speak better with my in-laws. So another one that I learned is, my mother-in-law made me a very beautiful mingzi, and so I need a new one because it's just, I've worn it out, right? So to be able to say to her, hey, I need a new hat. And that is going to be the thing that I'm learning. I actually can say it now, but I need to process it and need to revisit it in the memory palace and make sure that I do exactly the point here, which is to use it a sufficient number of times so that it goes from the encoding and the decoding process into long-term memory. So to review this very, very quickly, what you're dealing with is, and this applies to writing characters, it applies to anything that has to do with memory, is that you have something called the recency effect and the primacy effect, and you have serial positioning effect. And inside of all that, these are our secret tools in our special Batman tool belt of memory techniques. And what we can do with those is overcome and defeat the forgetting curve. And the forgetting curve is something that will happen more or less like this: exposure to information, and then it's gone, right? Now, when you have recency effect, you'll tend to remember things that you've encountered first the most, and then you'll encounter things that you'll remember most of the things that you encountered most recently the last, and then you will have serial positioning needing or helping you remember all those things much better, depending on how the recency and primacy is the primacy and recency effect. These things will really, really help you based on how that you use the serial positioning effect to make sure that you have sufficient amounts of primacy and recency. And that's how that we use memory palaces to give us internal mental serial positioning effect based on the principles of primacy and recency, so that decoding and encoding gets the information into long-term memory. The memory palace is the tool that delivers us the exposure to the primacy and the recency in the serial positioning. And I mean, I know that all sounds like woo rocket science, and when it's described that way, then it is a bit confusing. But that's why I have these video courses that you can go to magneticmemorymethod.com and register for, if you haven't already, to see memory palaces on the screen, see how the primacy and the recency effect all work with serial positioning inside of a memory palace, and then you can get going. So I haven't done much yet with character study, but that's just simply because it's not part of my goal set. And when it is, we can talk more about it, but that's basically exactly what I will do. Get an image in my mind, make sure that I can see the character in my mind, and then get it into muscle memory using all of these tools that are well established for creating long-term memory very, very quickly, as quickly as possible. It's just a matter of showing up to the task and not thinking in advance and creating fear, because there's no danger in reusing a memory palace. The only danger is in not using a memory palace sufficiently, as we discussed in this call, which is to actually complete one memory palace from beginning to end, and then reusing it based on it actually having been completed. So thanks everybody for being on the call. Thanks to those of you who said hello, and hope that you enjoyed this, and look forward to speaking to you again in the near future. And Alan says, thanks, Anthony. I'm a bit clearer now. Well, thank you as well. And Jack says, thank you. As I recall, says, I use a rainbow block system where my PAO is broke down into sets of 10, given each block of 10 as a color, and breaking the 10 blocks into 3 stories. Is that okay? Let's pick that up on a future call. Thank you for being on this one. Till we speak again, I really appreciate you being here. Have a really great rest of your week. And until we speak again, come visit me on magneticmemorymethod.com and keep yourself magnetic. Take care. Bye-bye.